It's Saturday morning, which is when I usually record these things. Sadly, according to my business coach, and yes, I do have one, and this will test whether or not he watches. He says that my aim should be to work Monday to Friday, never at weekends, and never when on holiday. Well, we'll see. Anyway, Saturday morning. For those of a certain vintage, and sorry to teenage viewers, Saturday morning for me will always be associated with Junior Choice. 8 till 10, might have been 7 till 10 on Radio 1 with Ed Stewpot Stewart, listened to in bed on a thing called a transistor radio in my earlier years. Now, there were certain Junior Choices that were played every week. Puff the Magic Dragon, The Laughing Policeman, and of course, Nelly the Elephant, which includes today's title and its lyrics, as Nelly packed her trunk and said goodbye to the circus, trump, trump, trump. Sorry, a very self-indulgent way to get around to talking about the American stock market. Just a couple of days ago, one client asked me to make sure that her investments did not have too much exposure to US shares, as she, and she's by no means alone, is worried about his, or rather, if we're being dispassionate, not easy I know, his policies and the effect they might have on everything, but more particularly her and your money. Now, one quite understandable reason for this is that if you look at the geographical spread of most, particularly the lower cost passive or tracker investment portfolios, which many of us recommend, you'll find that at least half or sometimes more is in US stock markets. Now, there's a good reason for this, as they generally follow the money, and that, believe it or not, is the proportion of the world's stock markets that the value of shares and stocks and so on of American markets makes up. Now, active as opposed to passive funds, where a fund manager decides whether to have more or less in any particular market or type of share, are about 3 times the cost of those passive funds, sometimes more. And many of them, because of that uncertainty, have had much less in the US, are underweight, as they would say, and in many cases have only around a third there, and so often more in the UK, Europe, and elsewhere. And as a result, those passive funds have generally done better just by going with the averages. It's often said that of all those active fund managers, only half get it right at any given time. Now, 10 years or more ago, I used to hedge bets in the old sense of the word, nothing to do with hedge funds, and generally recommended that half went into active and half into passive funds. 10 years on, in pretty much every case, the passive funds have been the winners. Now, in any individual year or month, that may not be the case. But despite all arguments in either direction, the Trump effect, if that's what it is, and I'm sure he'd be quick to claim it if it's a positive, has been good for markets, as has the Musk effect. And again, I'm sure he'd be quick to claim it on tech stocks, of which Tesla has been a big component and which have soared. See my article this week on the so-called Magnificent Seven. Another factor is a strong dollar exchange rate, which has been good for our own dear FTSE 100, as many of what we like to think of as our great homegrown companies actually make most of their money abroad in dollars. Big question, what next? Will those tariffs he's promising make everything more expensive in the US and ramp up inflation? Will the effect once again be positive on the many domestic companies, US companies who make up the bit of the market not dominated by the Amazons and Metas and Teslas and so on? And what about the climate change denying? Drill, baby, drill, and all of that. Great news for the oil companies, still big components once again of all those indices. However, interestingly, and certainly in the US, it seems that solar and other alternatives are actually cheaper than drill baby drilling to try and find new sources of oil. Think of all the space and the sunshine they have. Licenses are actually granted for all of this stuff state by state, and so there may well be not that much control over what happens by him at the centre. And there are now many vested interests invested in the apparently non-existent climate change adjacent businesses. So you say tomato, I say tomato, and there's the rub. Should you be in? Should you be out? Should you shake it all about? Which is the continuing argument for actually staying invested, not trying to be clever, and remembering the old saying that it's time in the market, not timing the market. More of all this soon.